Hey guys, this is Jay, and I'll be teaching Beginning Java Lesson 5. Alright, let's start out with the warm-up activity. So, you guys are going to try and make a function that will print 10 random integers between 1 and 10. So, I'm going to give you a second to pause this video and try it on your own. Alright, now let's see the solution. So here's the solution. First, we have our main method, and we're calling printrand. And then inside printrand, we have a for loop going from I equals 0 to I is less than 10. So this is going 0 to 9. And then every single time, it's going to print a random int from 1 to 10. Now let's do some review from last lesson. So first, what is a function and why is it so useful? A function is a defined task, and it's useful because some tasks that need to repeat it can be defined just once instead of writing them every single time. What are some situations where functions would be used? Whenever code is repeated, so for example, checking for a letter, counting, etc. So an overview of today's lesson, we're going to be going over arrays and array lists, and then we're going to be checking for words. So first, arrays. What is an array? An array is like a container that holds a fixed number of values from a certain data type. So for example, this is an example of an int array with a bunch of integers here. So which one of these arrays is valid? Well, remember, when we're considering arrays, actually, I'll give you guys a second to think about this on your own. All right, now I'll explain the answers. So remember, if we look at this definition of an array is a container that holds a fixed number of values of a certain data type. So all of these have different data types right here. For example, G is a string, and so is hi, but then these are ints. And then this is a double right here. So this array is the only one that holds just one type, in this case ints. Therefore, we know that 4 is the correct answer here. So how do we actually make an array? So you're going to say whatever the type of array is, 2 brackets, name of an array equals new type of array, 2 brackets, semicolon. And then inside here, you're going to put the length of the array. And this is because instead of knowing what's in your array, you usually just know how long you want your array to be when you start out making it. So in this case, this is going to make a double array of length 6. And all of them are going to be initialized to 0.0 since we haven't assigned any values for them yet. Alright, so assigning values in an array. What if we want to point with a third item in an array to point to the integer 1? Now remember, indexes and coding start at 0, which means the third item in the array will have index 2. So we would say int array of 2 equals 1. So these 2 brackets here are your way of accessing the index, and then equals 1 is assigning it the value of 1. Now let's do some example problems. So if we create a string array test array that is of length 6, and we want to make the third item hello, well, the third item is going to be under index 2, so we're going to say test array of 2 equals hello. Then with the fifth item, and we want it set to Jeff, we're going to say test array of 4 equals Jeff. Especially if there are patterns in our array, we can use for loops to fill them up. So here's an example. If we use a for loop going from int I equals 0 to I equals 5, then every time int array at that index is equal to the value of I. So let's actually show you what this code is doing. Before the for loop starts, we've just got an empty int array of length 6. But when I equals 0, then we're assigning the value at index 0 to 0. And then when the value is 1, we're assigning the value at index 1 to 1. And then 2 and 2, 3 and 3, so on. Now it's your turn. Use a for loop to fill up your int arrays. Specifically, you're going to want to try and make an array with these numbers in this order: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And here is the solution. All right, so first we have our main method. There are actually 2 for loops here. So first we're creating an int array of length 6. Then in our first for loop, we're starting at I equals 2 and then going to int array.length plus 2. But this is all right, we won't have an out of bounds error because notice that with here inside this for loop, we're saying int array of I minus 2, which means instead of going accessing the elements at 2 to int array.length plus 2, which would throw it in index out of bounds error, we're subtracting 2. So we're actually going from 0 to the last element of the array. But then we're assigning it the actual value of I, which means we're assigning each of these values from 2 to int array.length plus 2. So each of these values is going to be 2 more than the value of the index they're at. Now this second for loop, all it's doing is it's just printing out every single element in int array. Next, let's talk about array lists. So creating an array list, unlike arrays which are predefined, you have to actually import something in order to create an array list. So what you're going to say is import java.util.arraylist. And how you actually create an array list is you say ArrayList, angle brace, type, angle brace, name, equals new ArrayList, angle brace type, angle brace, and then parentheses, semicolon. So this may seem like a lot, but all you have to remember is that all you're changing is the name right here and the type. So the type has to be any sort of object. So it could be a string, but if you want to say, for example, an int, instead of saying ArrayList of int, you say ArrayList of integer, like we have here. Now, why do you do this? Well, it's because ArrayLists, the type has to be an object. So if you want to have an ArrayList of ints, then instead you have to say integer, which is the object form of an int. Now, in this example, we're creating an integer list, int list, and then we're adding 1 and 2 to it. So right now, its contents are 1, 2, and we can print that out with this for loop here. Let's go over some common array list functions. So .add of element, it's just going to add that element to the very back of the array list. .remove of index, it's going to remove whatever element is at that index. .getIndex doesn't actually do anything to the array list. Rather, it just returns whatever element is at that specific index in the array list. .clear sets the array list size to 0 and basically clears out all of the elements in that array. And finally, .size also doesn't actually do anything to the array list, but rather just returns the overall size of the array list. And there are many more, but these are the core functions that you'll have to remember. Alright, so now let's try this out on your own. I want you to make a string array list and then add 4 strings to it. You're going to remove the item at the third index, and then finally print out what the array list is now. I'll give you a second to try that on your own. Alright, now I'm sure you've paused the video and done it on your own, so let's look over the solution. Here's an example solution. So you create an array list here, you add 4 strings to it, and then you remove at index 2, which is the third element, and then you print it once again. Now let's talk about the searching function. So the goal of this method is to search a given array for a given string, and then return the index of the first index of that string. So fill in the function to make it work properly. So here we have public static int find word, and it takes 2 parameters, a string array of called array and a string word. So what goes here? Well, let's look at what we would do here. So first we'd have a for loop starting from 0 and ending at the last element in the array. And then for every single element in the array, if that array element is not null, and if the element at that specific index in the array equals the word, then you're going to return I. Now remember, when you return, you automatically exit the function. So whenever it first finds that word in one of the elements, it's going to exit the function returning that index. However, if it ends up not finding that word in the entire array, then it's going to exit the for loop right here and return -1. And because -1 isn't a valid index, this is going to tell the computer that you didn't end up being able to find that word in that array. Let's go over some review. So first, what is the difference between an array and an array list? An array has a set number of elements, and an array list doesn't. How do we add, delete, and get access to elements in an array list? The add function, the remove function, and the get function. How can we tell if a value exists in a list? You can use a for loop and iterate through the list, checking at every single element. Finally, I'd like to remind you that we have Tuesday and Sunday office hours. So if you are confused about any of the concepts taught in today's lesson, feel free to join us at 4:15 to 5:15 p.m. on Tuesday or Sunday at this Zoom meeting ID to ask your questions. And that's all for today's lesson. So thank you for watching, guys.